The dust swirled across Nogales, Arizona, as Faith Benson clutched her swollen belly, tears streaming down her face as she stared at the closed church doors before her. 6 months pregnant with nowhere to go, the setting sun cast long shadows on the dirt road beneath her worn boots. Reverend Williamson's words still rang in her ears. "We don't shelter women of your situation. Find charity elsewhere." It was 1878, and an unmarried woman with child was considered nothing short of a sinner beyond redemption in these parts. Faith's shoulders shook with silent sobs as she turned away from the white wooden church that stood as a beacon of hope for everyone but her. The journey from Missouri had been long and arduous, but her parents' ultimatum had been clear: leave or face public shame alongside them. She'd chosen to spare them the humiliation, only to find herself alone in a border town with dwindling coins and growing desperation. "Madam, you all right there?" The voice startled her. Faith quickly wiped her tears with her sleeve and turned to face a tall man atop a chestnut stallion. His face was partially shadowed by a well-worn cowboy hat, but she could see kind eyes studying her with genuine concern. "I'm fine," she lied, attempting dignity despite her circumstances. The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing broad shoulders beneath a dusty denim shirt. His boots hit the dirt with a thud as he approached, keeping a respectful distance. "Beggin' your pardon, but you don't look fine to me." His voice was deep but gentle, like distant thunder without the threat. "Name's Rhett Ingram. I run the Silver Creek Ranch just north of town." Faith hesitated, years of proper upbringing warring with her desperate situation. "Faith Benson," she finally replied, unconsciously placing a protective hand over her rounded middle. Rhett's eyes followed the movement but showed no judgment. "Seems to me the church doors should be open to anyone in need, especially—" He gestured vaguely toward her condition. "Apparently God's house has standards I don't meet," Faith said bitterly. Rhett's expression hardened momentarily as he glanced at the church. "Well, Miss Benson, I reckon God's love lives here too." He gestured toward the open land beyond the town. "My ranch might not have fancy stained glass windows, but there's shelter, food, and honest work if you're willing." Faith stared at him, suspicion mingling with desperate hope. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." "My mother always said true faith isn't about sitting in pews on Sundays. It's about extending a hand when someone needs it most." He smiled slightly. "Besides, my housekeeper's been complaining about needing help with the cooking. Ranch hands eat like they've never seen food before." Faith hesitated, weighing her options, which were admittedly few. This cowboy could be dangerous, but something in his steady gaze suggested otherwise. And what choice did she have? The night would be cold, and her meager savings wouldn't secure a room at the town's only hotel for more than a night or two. "I'm a good cook," she finally said, as if that settled matters. Rhett's smile widened, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Well then, Miss Benson, seems we might be able to help each other." He retrieved his horse and offered her his arm. "Silver Creek is about an hour's ride. Think you're up for it?" Faith nodded, accepting his help onto the horse. Rhett mounted behind her, keeping a respectful distance despite the shared saddle. As they rode away from Nogales, Faith couldn't help looking back at the church steeple silhouetted against the darkening sky. She'd sought sanctuary within those walls, but found it instead with a stranger whose kindness contradicted everything she'd been taught about the dangers of the West. "Don't worry about Reverend Williamson," Rhett said, noticing her backward glance. "He's new to town. Brought his Eastern notions with him. Most folks around here judge people on how they act, not on mistakes they might have made." "This isn't a mistake," Faith said defensively, her hand returning to her belly. "It's a child." Rhett was silent for a moment, Yes, madam, it is. And every child deserves a chance, same as its mother. The sincerity in his voice loosened something tight in Faith's chest. As Silver Creek Ranch appeared on the horizon, she allowed herself, for the first time in months, to feel a fragile hope blossoming alongside the life within her. Silver Creek Ranch sprawled across a valley nestled between rolling hills, much larger than Faith had imagined. A two-story main house stood proudly at the center, flanked by various outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn. Several smaller cabins dotted the property where, Rhett explained, the ranch hands lived. "It's beautiful," Faith whispered as they approached. "Been in my family for 20 years, Rhett said, pride evident in his voice. "My father started with just 50 acres and 10 head of cattle. Now we're running over 1,000 head across 5,000 acres. As they rode into the central yard, a plump older woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back in a severe bun, but her face softened when she spotted them. "Rhett Ingram. I was about to send Miguel out looking for you. Supper's been ready for." She stopped short when she noticed Faith. "And who might this be?" Rhett dismounted and helped Faith down carefully. "Mrs. Hernandez, this is Miss Faith Benson. She'll be staying with us for a while and helping you in the kitchen, if that suits you." Mrs. Hernandez's sharp eyes took in Faith's condition immediately, but she merely nodded. "About time I got some help around here. These men eat enough to feed half of Arizona territory." She stepped forward and took Faith's arm. "Come inside, child. You look dead on your feet." Faith shot a grateful look at Rhett, who tipped his hat. "Get her settled, Mrs. Hernandez. I need to check on that new foal before turning in." The ranch house interior surprised Faith with its simple elegance. Polished wooden floors stretched beneath sturdy, well-crafted furniture. Navajo rugs added warmth and color, while oil lamps cast a golden glow throughout the spacious rooms. Mrs. Hernandez led her to a cozy bedroom on the first floor. "Figured climbing stairs in your condition wouldn't be ideal," she explained, bustling about to turn down the bed. "Bathrooms down the hall. We're fortunate Mr. Ingram Sr. insisted on indoor plumbing, modern as you please." Faith sat on the bed, overwhelmed. "You're very kind, but I don't understand why you're helping me." The older woman paused her efficient movements. "Girl, I've worked for the Ingrams for 15 years. Rhett was just a boy when I started. I've watched him grow into a man who judges character, not circumstances." She sat beside Faith with a sigh. "Now, I won't pry about your situation, but know this: you're safe here." Tears welled in Faith's eyes. "Thank you." "None of that now," Mrs. Hernandez said briskly, standing. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow's soon enough to start earning your keep." Left alone, Faith explored her new room. A simple wardrobe stood against one wall, a washstand with a porcelain basin against another. The window overlooked a small garden, now shadowed in twilight. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, safe, and infinitely better than she had dared hope for when the church doors closed in her face. She undressed and slipped between cool sheets, her hand resting protectively over her unborn child. "We'll be all right," she whispered. "We've found a place to stay for now." Sleep came quickly, but her dreams were troubled by memories. Edward's charming smile as he promised marriage, his cold rejection when she told him about the baby, her parents' devastated expressions, the long journey west alone. She woke before dawn, disoriented until the events of the previous day came rushing back. Determined to prove her worth, Faith dressed in her simplest dress and made her way to the kitchen where Mrs. Hernandez was already kneading bread dough with powerful, practiced movements. "Good morning," Faith said. "Please let me help." Mrs. Hernandez nodded approvingly. "You can start the coffee. Ranch hands needed strong enough to stand a spoon in. By sunrise, they had prepared a hearty breakfast of flapjacks, eggs, bacon, and biscuits. Faith worked diligently alongside the older woman, grateful for the familiar tasks that kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. The ranch hands filed in shortly after dawn, a dozen weathered men of various ages who eyed Faith curiously, but greeted her politely. Rhett entered last, freshly shaven, his dark hair still damp. He nodded at Faith with a small smile before taking his place at the head of the table. "Men, this is Miss Benson. She'll be helping Mrs. Hernandez from now on. I expect you all to show her the same respect you'd show your own mothers and sisters." There was a chorus of yes, boss, and welcome, Miss Benson, before they fell upon the food like the starving men Mrs. Hernandez had described. As days turned to weeks, Faith settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She rose early, prepared meals alongside Mrs. Hernandez, tended to the household linens, and gradually took over more responsibilities as her skills became evident. Her pregnancy advanced, but she worked steadily, finding unexpected peace in the structured days and dreamless nights. Rhett remained respectfully distant yet watchful, ensuring she had everything she needed without intruding on her privacy. Sometimes, she caught him observing her with an unreadable expression that made her heart beat faster, though she told herself it was merely concern for her condition. One evening in late September, Faith sat on the porch swing, enjoying the cooler air after a hot day. The sun was setting, painting the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks that took her breath away. She heard boots on the steps and turned to see Rhett approaching with 2 glasses of lemonade. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, offering her a glass. "It's your porch," she replied with a small smile, accepting the cool drink gratefully. He settled beside her, leaving enough space between them to maintain propriety. "How are you feeling? Mrs. Hernandez thinks you're working too hard." Faith sipped her lemonade. "I'm perfectly fine. The work keeps me from thinking too much." Rhett studied her profile. "And what thoughts are you avoiding, if you don't mind my asking?" The direct question startled her. Most people tiptoed around her situation, afraid to cause offense. "The past, the future, everything in between," she admitted. "The future isn't as bleak as it might seem," he said quietly. "You have skills, determination, and you have—" He hesitated. "Friends here." "Friends," Faith repeated, tasting the word. "I haven't had many of those lately." "Their loss," Rhett said firmly. "I've watched you these past weeks. You work harder than anyone despite your condition. You're kind to the men, patient with old Mrs. Hernandez even when her arthritis makes her cranky. You've earned respect here." Faith felt warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the setting sun. "Thank you for saying that. And for everything else you've done." Rhett shook his head. "I haven't done anything special. You gave me a chance when others wouldn't. That's everything." She hesitated, then added, "I never told you why I'm alone. You don't owe me explanations." "Perhaps not, but I'd like to tell you anyway." Faith took a deep breath. "I was engaged to Edward Harrington, son of a prominent banker in Springfield, Missouri. He was charming, handsome, promising a bright future. When I discovered I was with child, I was frightened but assumed he would simply move up our wedding date." She paused, the memory still painful. "Instead, he denied the child was his, claimed I had been with other men. He broke our engagement publicly, humiliating me and my family. My father is the town's doctor. His reputation was everything. They gave me money and sent me west to start fresh where no one knew our shame." Rhett's jaw tightened. "This Edward sounds like he deserves a meeting with the business end of my rifle." The fierce protectiveness in his tone surprised her. "Violence wouldn't change anything. Besides, I've learned important lessons about trusting fine words from handsome men. Not all men break their promises, Rhett said quietly. Their eyes met and something electric passed between them before Faith looked away, suddenly flustered. It's getting chilly. I should help Mrs. Hernandez with supper. Rhett stood immediately, offering his hand. Of course. As their fingers touched, Faith felt that same current run through her again. She withdrew quickly, nodding her thanks before retreating inside, her heart pounding with emotions she wasn't ready to examine. The weeks passed, and October brought cooler temperatures to the Arizona territory. Faith's 8th month of pregnancy made her movements slower, though she insisted on continuing her duties despite Mrs. Hernandez's protests. One crisp morning, Faith was hanging laundry when she spotted riders approaching a man and woman she didn't recognize, alongside the Reverend Williamson. Her heart sank. The Reverend had made no secret of his disapproval whenever their paths crossed in town on the rare occasions Rhett had taken her along to purchase supplies. She hurried inside to find Mrs. Hernandez. Visitors coming, the Reverend and 2 others. Mrs. Hernandez frowned. That man has no business here. Where's Rhett? Checking fence lines on the north pasture. He won't be back until dinner. Well then, we'll handle this ourselves. The older woman squared her shoulders. You stay in the kitchen. I'll see what they want. Faith retreated as instructed, but positioned herself near the window where she could hear the conversation on the front porch. Good morning, Mrs. Hernandez, came the Reverend's pompous voice. I've brought Mr. and Mrs. Danvers from the Territorial Adoption Agency. We understand you're harboring an unmarried expectant woman. Miss Benson is employed here, Mrs. Hernandez replied coolly. What business is that of yours? A woman's voice, thin and reedy, spoke next. We provide services for unfortunate women who find themselves in compromising situations. The child can be placed with a respectable family, and the mother can make a fresh start without the burden of her. Mistake. Faith's hands flew to her belly protectively, her child kicking vigorously as if sensing her distress. Miss Benson doesn't consider her baby a mistake, Mrs. Hernandez said firmly. And neither does Mr. Ingram, who has provided her with honest work and a safe home. Mr. Ingram's reputation is also our concern, Reverend Williamson said. Housing an unwed mother sends a message that immorality is acceptable. The community is beginning to talk. Which community might that be? Came a new voice, Rhett's hard as steel. Faith hadn't heard him approach. Because the people I respect in Nogales know better than to judge what they don't understand. Faith moved closer to the window, peering around the curtain. Rhett stood at the bottom of the porch steps, still mounted on his horse, his expression thunderous. Mr. Ingram, the Reverend began, we're merely concerned about propriety and the welfare of the child. Are you? Rhett dismounted and climbed the steps slowly, deliberately. Because it seems to me you're more concerned with appearances than actual Christian charity. You turned Miss Benson away when she needed shelter, and now you want to take her child. That's not godliness, Reverend. That's hypocrisy. Now see here. The man Faith assumed was Mr. Danvers started. No, you see here, Rhett interrupted. Miss Benson and her child are under my protection. She's a valued employee of this ranch and a woman of character and dignity. I won't have you or anyone else harassing her or suggesting she should be separated from her baby. Faith's heart swelled at his defense. No one had stood up for her like this, not her parents, certainly not Edward. This is most irregular, Mrs. Danvers sniffed. The child deserves a mother and father. The child has a mother who loves it fiercely, Rhett countered. That's more than many children get. Now, I believe our business is concluded. Good day to you all. There was a moment of tense silence before she heard footsteps descending the porch stairs and horses moving away. Only when the sound had faded did Faith emerge from the kitchen, finding Rhett and Mrs. Hernandez still standing in the entryway. "You heard?" Rhett asked gently when he saw her. Faith nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "They won't bother you again," he promised. "Thank you," she finally managed, "for everything you said, for standing up for me." Rhett's expression softened. "I meant every word." He hesitated, then added, "Faith, I need you to know something. You and your child will always have a place here for as long as you want it. No conditions, no expectations. Just a promise." The sincerity in his eyes undid her completely. Faith burst into tears, months of fear and uncertainty pouring out. Without thinking, Rhett stepped forward and pulled her into his arms, his hand gently stroking her back as she cried against his chest. Mrs. Hernandez quietly excused herself, leaving them alone. When Faith's tears finally subsided, she remained in Rhett's embrace, feeling safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. "I'm sorry," she sniffled, reluctantly pulling away. "Your shirt is soaked." "Small price to pay," he replied with a gentle smile, his hand still resting lightly on her shoulders. "Are you all right?" Faith nodded, suddenly acutely aware of his closeness, the warmth of his hands through the fabric of her dress. "I will be." Rhett studied her face for a long moment, then stepped back, clearing his throat. "I should get back to work. Those fences won't mend themselves." "Of course," Faith said, inexplicably disappointed at the loss of contact. "Thank you again." As he turned to leave, Faith realized with startling clarity that somewhere along the way, her feelings for Rhett Ingram had evolved into something far more complicated than gratitude. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. November brought early morning frost and the anticipation of Faith's impending delivery. Dr. Morgan from Nogales had visited the ranch twice to check on her, pronouncing both mother and child healthy despite the unusual circumstances. Faith had prepared a corner of her room for the baby, with a hand-crafted cradle Rhett had commissioned from the town carpenter and soft blankets sewn by Mrs. Hernandez. One evening, while helping Mrs. Hernandez preserve the last of the autumn apples, Faith felt a sharp pain that took her breath away. She gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. "Faith," Mrs. Hernandez was immediately at her side. "Is it time?" Faith nodded, unable to speak as another contraction rippled through her. The older woman helped her to her bedroom, calling for one of the ranch hands to fetch Dr. Morgan immediately. "But it's too early," Faith gasped when she could speak again. "2 more weeks. Babies come when they're ready, not when we expect them, Mrs. Hernandez said practically, helping Faith change into a nightgown. "First babies are often eager to meet the world." Hours passed in a blur of pain and exhaustion. Mrs. Hernandez stayed by her side, wiping her brow with cool cloths and offering words of encouragement. Night fell with still no sign of the doctor. "The storm," Mrs. Hernandez murmured, glancing worriedly at the window where sleet pattered against the glass. "The roads might be impassable." Another contraction gripped Faith stronger than the last. "I can't wait," she gasped. The bedroom door burst open and Rhett appeared, his coat and hat covered in ice. "Doc can't make it." Creaks flooded the low road. His eyes widened as he took in Faith's condition, her face contorted in pain. Without hesitation, he crossed to her bedside and took her hand. "Tell me what you need." "I need this baby born safely," Faith said through gritted teeth. "Mrs. Hernandez knows what to do. She's delivered babies before." "Many times," the housekeeper confirmed, rolling up her sleeves. "But I need hot water, clean towels, and the scissors from my sewing basket, sterilized in alcohol." Rhett nodded grimly and turned to leave, but Faith clung to his hand. "Please," she whispered, "don't go far." Something passed between them, understanding, promise, connection. "I'll be right outside the door," he assured her, squeezing her hand before gently disengaging. The next hours were the most difficult of Faith's life. The pain seemed unbearable, her strength fading with each contraction. Mrs. Hernandez remained steady, guiding her with calm authority, but as midnight approached, concern etched the older woman's features. "The baby is turned wrong," she whispered to Rhett during a brief consultation in the hallway. "I've tried everything I know." Rhett's face paled. "What can we do, pray?" Mrs. Hernandez said simply. "And maybe there's a Yaqui woman in the settlement beyond the south pasture, Elena. She knows old ways, medicine my grandmother taught me, but I've forgotten. I'll find her," Rhett said immediately. "The storm," Mrs. Hernandez began, "doesn't matter." His jaw set with determination. "Keep Faith fighting. I'll be back as soon as I can." Inside the bedroom, Faith had fallen into an exhausted half-sleep between contractions. She stirred when Rhett approached her bedside. "I'm going for help," he told her softly. "Someone who might know what to do." Faith's eyes widened with fear. "It's dangerous out there." Rhett took her hand and, to her surprise, pressed it to his lips. "Not as dangerous as losing you would be," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Hold on, Faith, for your child, for me." Before she could respond, another contraction seized her. When it passed, Rhett was gone, and she heard the sound of hoofbeats fading into the howling wind. Time lost meaning as Faith drifted between pain and exhaustion. Mrs. Hernandez's worried face swam above her, murmuring prayers in Spanish. Faith thought of her parents, wondering if they would ever know their grandchild. She thought of Edward, who had rejected this precious life before it even began. Mostly, she thought of Rhett, riding through a dangerous storm to save her and her child. "Fight, Miss Faith," Mrs. Hernandez urged. "The baby needs you strong." "I'm trying," Faith whispered. "Tell Rhett." But what would she tell him? That in these few months he had become more important to her than anyone ever had, that she had begun to dream of possibilities she had thought forever lost. That she might be falling in love with him. The sound of the front door slamming jolted her back to full consciousness. Voices in the hallway, one unfamiliar, a woman speaking accented English. Then the bedroom door opened to reveal Rhett, soaked and haggard, accompanied by a small, wiry woman with silver-streaked black hair and piercing dark eyes. "This is Elena," Rhett said, his voice ragged with exhaustion and worry. "She's going to help." Elena moved to Faith's side with quiet authority, placing gnarled hands on her swollen belly. She spoke in rapid Spanish to Mrs. Hernandez, who translated. "She says the baby is sideways. She can turn it, but it will hurt very much." Faith nodded weakly. "Whatever it takes." Rhett moved to leave, but Faith called out, "Stay, please." He hesitated, looking to Elena, who nodded once. He crossed to Faith's side, taking her hand in both of his. "I'm here." What followed was agony beyond anything Faith had experienced, as Elena's skilled hands worked to reposition the baby. Faith screamed, clutching Rhett's hand so tightly her nails drew blood, but he never flinched, murmuring encouragement and wiping tears from her face with his free hand. Then suddenly, Elena stepped back with a satisfied nod. "Ahora," she said. "Now." With renewed purpose, Faith pushed when instructed, drawing strength from Rhett's unwavering presence. As dawn broke over the ranch, a lusty cry filled the room. Her child finally arrived. "A boy, Mrs. Hernandez announced, tears in her eyes as she wrapped the squalling infant. "A strong, perfect boy." Elena efficiently delivered the afterbirth and tended to Faith while Mrs. Hernandez cleaned the baby. When all was settled, the Yaqui woman placed a small leather pouch of herbs beside Faith's bed. "Tea," she instructed in halting English. "For strength. For milk." "Thank you," Faith whispered. "How can I repay you?" Alina glanced between Faith and Rhett, a knowing smile crossing her weathered face. "Love him well," she said, nodding toward Rhett. "He rode through spirits of storm for you." With that cryptic statement, she left, Mrs. Hernandez following to see her out and prepare the promised tea. Alone with Rhett and her newborn son, Faith felt an overwhelming wave of emotion. "Would you like to hold him?" Rhett looked stunned but nodded, carefully taking the bundled infant. His large, calloused hands cradled the baby with surprising gentleness. "He's so small," he marveled, "but perfect." "I thought I might name him James," Faith said softly, "after my grandfather." "James," Rhett repeated, smiling as the baby wrapped tiny fingers around his index finger. "It suits him." "Rhett, what Alina said." Faith began hesitantly. "She talks in riddles," he said quickly, a flush creeping up his neck. "Don't mind her." Faith gathered her courage. "Did you really ride through spirits of storm for me?" Rhett met her gaze, the intensity in his eyes taking her breath away. "I would have ridden through hell itself if that's what it took," he said quietly. The raw honesty in his voice broke down the last of Faith's defenses. "Why?" she whispered. Rhett carefully placed James in the cradle before returning to sit at the edge of Faith's bed. "Because somewhere between finding you at that church and watching you fight to bring this child into the world, I fell in love with you," he admitted. "I know the timing is wrong. You've just had a baby, you're vulnerable, and the last man who claimed to love you betrayed you terribly. I don't expect anything, I just needed you to know." Faith's eyes filled with tears. "The timing is perfect," she contradicted him, "because I've fallen in love with you too, Rhett Ingram. Not because you saved me, though you did, but because of who you are, a man who sees value where others see shame, who offers kindness without conditions, who rides through storms to bring help to a woman and child who aren't even his." Rhett took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "They could be," he said softly, "if you wanted. Not right away, when you're ready, if you're ever ready." James began to fuss in his cradle. Rhett retrieved him, placing him carefully in Faith's arms. As she cradled her son, looking up at the man who had changed her life, Faith felt a certainty she had never known before. "We'll be ready," she promised. "One day soon." Winter settled over Silver Creek Ranch, transforming the landscape with a blanket of pristine snow that glittered beneath the Arizona sun. Faith recovered her strength gradually, spending quiet days caring for James and helping with the lighter household duties that Mrs. Hernandez would allow. Rhett kept his word, patient and respectful of her need for time. He doted on James, often taking the infant from Faith when he returned from his ranch work, carrying him around the house while telling him stories about cattle and horses. To Faith's amusement, James seemed to understand, his blue eyes tracking Rhett's movements with fascination. As Christmas approached, the ranch house transformed under Mrs. Hernandez's direction. Evergreen boughs adorned the mantels, their fresh scent filling the rooms. The ranch hands contributed to the festivities, bringing in a massive pine tree that nearly touched the ceiling of the main parlor. "First Christmas at Silver Creek should be special," Rhett explained when Faith expressed surprise at the elaborate preparations. "For both of you." On Christmas Eve, after the traditional feast and the exchange of modest gifts, Faith put James to bed early. The infant, now 6 weeks old, had settled into a routine that allowed his exhausted mother a few hours of peace in the evenings. She found Rhett alone in the parlor, nursing a small glass of whiskey as he stared into the crackling fire. The ranch hands had retired to their cabins, and Mrs. Hernandez had gone to bed early, complaining of aching joints from the cold. "May I join you?" Faith asked from the doorway. Rhett looked up with a smile that warmed her more than the fire. "Always." She settled beside him on the sofa, close enough that their shoulders touched. The intimacy of the moment, the darkened room, the dancing firelight, their proximity made her heart race. "I have something for you," she said. "A Christmas gift I didn't want to give you in front of the others." Rhett raised an eyebrow as she handed him a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. He unwrapped it carefully to reveal a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool. "Mrs. Hernandez taught me," Faith explained. "I've never knitted before, so it's not perfect, but it's beautiful," Rhett interrupted, running his fingers over the even stitches. "Thank you." "Turn it over," she urged. He did, finding a small heart embroidered in red thread on one end. "It means—" Faith hesitated, then plunged ahead. "It means I'm ready, Rhett, if you still want us, me and James." Rhett set the scarf aside carefully before taking her hands in his. "I've wanted you both since the moment I found you outside that church," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "Are you sure?" Faith nodded, suddenly shy despite her boldness. "I've never been more certain of anything." Rhett released her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment." He opened it to reveal a simple gold ring set with a small diamond flanked by 2 sapphires. "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "Faith Benson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Would you let me be a father to James and give him brothers and sisters to grow up with here at Silver Creek?" Tears of joy spilled down Faith's cheeks as she nodded, too overcome to speak. Rhett slipped the ring onto her finger before cupping her face in his hands and kissing her with such tender passion that she felt it down to her toes. When they finally parted, breathless, Faith rested her forehead against his. "This is not how I imagined my life would be when I arrived in Nogales," she whispered. "Sometimes God's greatest blessings come in unexpected packages," Rhett replied, brushing away her tears with his thumb. "Like a stubborn, brave woman with a baby on the way, standing outside a church that wasn't worthy of her." They were married on New Year's Day in the parlor of Silver Creek Ranch, with Mrs. Hernandez, the ranch hands, and even Alina from the Yaqui settlement as witnesses. Baby James, dressed in a christening gown Mrs. Hernandez had secretly sewn, slept peacefully in a basket decorated with ribbons throughout the simple ceremony. Judge Harmon from Nogales performed the service, his booming voice filling the room as Rhett and Faith exchanged vows written in their own hands. There were tears in Rhett's eyes as Faith promised to love him faithfully all her days, and her voice shook as he vowed to cherish her and James as his greatest treasures. "By the power vested in me by the Arizona Territory, I now pronounce you husband and wife," the judge declared. "Mr. Ingram, you may kiss your bride." Rhett gathered Faith close, his kiss a promise of all the days to come. The gathered witnesses erupted in cheers and applause, startling James awake. His cry of protest made everyone laugh as Faith scooped him up to comfort him. "Mrs. Ingram," Rhett said, testing the words with evident satisfaction. "And young Master James Ingram." He took the baby from Faith, settling him against his shoulder where James immediately calmed, his tiny hand clutching Rhett's shirt. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music provided by 2 ranch hands who played fiddle and guitar. Faith and Rhett shared their first dance as husband and wife, while Mrs. Hernandez proudly held James, her usually stern face softened with joy. As midnight approached, the newlyweds bid their guests good night and retired to the master bedroom, now theirs to share. James was settled in his cradle in the adjoining nursery that Rhett had secretly prepared as a wedding gift. Alone at last, Faith felt a flutter of nerves despite her certainty about their union. Rhett seemed to sense her anxiety and approached her slowly, taking her hands in his. "We have all the time in the world," he assured her. Nothing needs to happen tonight that you're not ready for." Faith's heart swelled with love for this man who always put her comfort first. "I am ready," she said quietly. "I've been ready since the day you defended me against the Reverend and the adoption people. That was when I knew, without doubt, that you were the man I wanted to spend my life with." Rhett gathered her close, his kiss deepening as they finally gave themselves permission to express the love that had been building between them for months. Later, as they lay entwined beneath the quilts, Faith's head resting on Rhett's chest, she marveled at how far she had come from that desperate day outside the church. "What are you thinking about?" Rhett asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best," she answered. "If Reverend Williamson hadn't turned me away, you might never have found me." Rhett's arm tightened around her. "I'd like to think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are meant to be, Faith." She lifted her head to look into his eyes. "Like us. Exactly like us," he confirmed before capturing her lips in another kiss. Spring came early to the Arizona territory, bringing wildflowers that carpeted the rangeland in vibrant colors. Faith and Rhett settled into married life with surprising ease, as if they had always been meant to share their days and nights. James thrived under their combined care, growing into a sturdy, cheerful infant whose laughter became the heartbeat of Silver Creek Ranch. In April, Faith received a letter that Mrs. Hernandez delivered with uncharacteristic hesitation. "From Missouri," the housekeeper explained. "Your parents, perhaps." Faith's hands trembled as she broke the wax seal. She had written to her parents after James's birth, sending another letter following her marriage, but had received no response until now. The letter was brief, formal, her father's handwriting informing her that they had read of her marriage in a territorial newspaper that had somehow made its way to Springfield. They expressed cautious wishes for her happiness and enclosed a small bank draft as a belated wedding gift. The final line gave Faith pause. "Should you ever wish to visit, you would not find our door closed to you or your family." It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, nor was it the warm reconciliation she might have hoped for. But it was an opening, a crack in the wall of silence that had stood between them since her departure. Rhett found her on the porch later, staring at the letter. He sat beside her, saying nothing as she explained its contents. "You want to go?" he asked when she finished. "To Missouri." Faith considered the question carefully. "Not yet," she decided. "Perhaps in a year or two, when James is older, when we have more children, perhaps." She placed a hand on her stomach meaningfully. Rhett's eyes widened. "Are you saying?" Faith nodded, a smile blooming on her face. "Doctor Morgan confirmed it yesterday. Late October, he thinks." Rhett whooped with joy, lifting Faith from the swing and spinning her around until she laughingly demanded he put her down. He dropped to his knees instead, pressing his ear against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there," he said solemnly. "I'm your pa, and I can't wait to meet you." Faith ran her fingers through his hair, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain all the love she felt. "You're going to be the most wonderful father to all our children," she said softly. Rhett looked up at her, his eyes shining. "And you're already the most wonderful mother and wife a man could ask for." The following Sunday, Rhett suggested something that surprised Faith. "I thought we might attend church in Nogales today." Faith tensed involuntarily. She hadn't set foot in the church since that fateful day. "Why?" "I heard Reverend Williamson was reassigned. The new pastor, Reverend Holloway, stopped by the general store when I was in town yesterday. Seems like a different sort altogether. Invited everyone in the area to services, especially new families." Faith hesitated. "What if people talk?" "About me, about James." Rhett took her hands firmly in his. Then they'll be talking about Mrs. Faith Ingram, my beloved wife, and James Ingram, my son in every way that matters. We have nothing to hide or be ashamed of." His confidence bolstered her courage. They dressed in their Sunday best, bundled James in a new outfit Mrs. Hernandez had sewn, and rode into Nogales together. As they approached the white church building, Faith's steps faltered. Rhett's arm around her waist steadied her. "We can leave any time you want," he assured her. Taking a deep breath, Faith nodded and continued up the steps. The church was already half full when they entered, and several heads turned at their arrival. Faith felt the weight of curious stares but was surprised when Mrs. Johnson, the shopkeeper's wife, approached immediately. "Mrs. Ingram, how wonderful to see you and your beautiful family," she greeted warmly. "And this must be little James. May I?" She held out her arms, and after a moment's hesitation, Faith allowed her to take the baby. Others gathered around, admiring James and congratulating them on their marriage. There were no whispers, no sidelong glances of judgment, only the ordinary welcome of a community to its members. Reverend Holloway proved to be as different from his predecessor as promised. Middle-aged with kind eyes and a gentle manner, he preached not of sin and damnation but of grace and second chances. When he spoke of God's love extending to all, regardless of circumstance or past, Faith felt tears prick her eyes. After the service, they joined the congregation outside where tables had been set up for a community meal. As they mingled, Faith noticed a young woman standing apart from the others, her posture defensive, her swollen belly evident beneath her worn dress. "Excuse me," Faith said to Rhett before approaching the woman. "Hello," she said gently. "I'm Faith Ingram. My husband Rhett and I have a ranch north of town." The woman regarded her warily. "Mabel Watson," she replied. "I'm just passing through." Faith recognized the fear and desperation in Mabel's eyes, the same emotions that had consumed her months ago. "Where are you staying?" Mabel shrugged. "Nowhere yet. Just arrived on the morning stage." "And where are you headed?" "California, eventually, when I can afford passage." Mabel's hand moved protectively to her middle. "They say there's work for women there, no questions asked." Faith glanced back at Rhett, who was watching them while bouncing James in his arms. He nodded slightly, understanding passing between them without words. "Mabel," Faith said, turning back to the young woman, "Silver Creek Ranch always needs help, especially with another baby on the way." She touched her own stomach meaningfully. "There's a small cabin near the main house that would be perfect for a mother and child." Mabel's eyes widened with suspicion. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Faith smiled, remembering her own identical question to Rhett all those months ago. "Because someone once helped me when I stood exactly where you're standing." Because God's love lives beyond these church walls too, in the actions of people who believe in second chances. Tears filled Mabel's eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll come home with us today," Faith offered. "Just to rest and consider your options. No obligations." Rhett joined them, James gurgling happily in his arms. "Everything all right here?" he asked. "Rhett, this is Mabel Watson. She might be helping Mrs. Hernandez with the new baby comes." Faith held her breath, hoping she hadn't overstepped. Rhett extended his free hand to Mabel. "Mrs. Hernandez would be mighty grateful for the help. She claims she's getting too old to keep up with our growing family." Mabel looked between them, indecision clear on her face. Finally, she placed her hand in Rhett's. "Thank you," she whispered. "I won't forget this kindness." As they walked toward their wagon, Reverend Holloway approached. "Mr. and Mrs. Ingram," a word Faith tensed, but the Reverend's smile was genuine. "I just wanted to say how happy we are to have your family joining our congregation. And—" he glanced at Mabel. "I see you're already continuing the fine tradition of Western hospitality." Just offering a helping hand where it's needed, Rhett replied, his arm tightening around Faith's waist. The very essence of faith, the Reverend nodded approvingly. I look forward to seeing you next Sunday. As they rode home, James sleeping soundly in Faith's arms and Mabel dozing against the wagon side, Rhett leaned over to kiss his wife's cheek. "What was that for?" Faith asked, smiling. "For being you," he replied simply. "For completing the circle by helping someone else the way you were helped." Faith leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "I was just thinking about what you said that first day, that God's love lives here too, outside the church. You were right." "I usually am," Rhett teased, earning an elbow in his ribs. "But especially about you and what you'd bring to Silver Creek. You've made this ranch a true home, Faith." As Silver Creek appeared on the horizon, Faith thought about the journey that had brought her here, the pain, the fear, but ultimately the joy of finding her place in the world. Not in the grand home Edward had promised, but in a ranch house filled with love and the family she and Rhett were building together. "Home," she repeated softly, the word encompassing everything she had found in Rhett's arms and everything they would create in the years to come. As if in agreement, James stirred against her chest, his tiny hand reaching up to touch her face. Faith caught his fingers, pressing a kiss to his palm. Home indeed. 10 years later, Silver Creek Ranch had flourished beyond anything Faith could have imagined on that desperate day when Rhett found her outside the church. The property had expanded to nearly 10,000 acres, with Rhett's careful management and shrewd investments turning it into one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. The family had grown as well. James, now 10, was the spitting image of Rhett, despite their lack of blood connection, tall for his age, with the same determined jaw and gentle eyes. He took his responsibilities as the eldest sibling seriously, especially when it came to his sister Sarah. Born in that October, Faith had announced on the porch, now a spirited 9-year-old with her mother's auburn hair and her father's dimpled smile. The twins, Michael and Matthew, had arrived 3 years later, bringing double the mischief and laughter to Silver Creek. At 6, they were inseparable partners in adventure, forever testing the boundaries of their parents' patience. Little Rebecca, just 3, completed their family for now, though Rhett often teased about wanting enough children to field their own baseball team. Mrs. Hernandez, despite her periodic threats to retire, remained the heart of the household, though her duties had lightened considerably with the addition of Mabel Watson, now Turner, who had married one of Rhett's foremen 2 years after arriving at Silver Creek. Her son Daniel was James's best friend and constant shadow. On a warm summer evening, as the children played in the yard under Mrs. Hernandez's watchful eye, Faith and Rhett sat on the same porch swing where they had shared so many important moments. "I received a letter today," Faith said, leaning comfortably against her husband's side. "From the church committee." Rhett raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what do they want now? More pies for the social?" Faith laughed. "No, though I'm sure they wouldn't turn those down. They're establishing a home for unwed mothers in Nogales, a place where women can stay during their confinement and receive training for employment afterward, with childcare provided if they choose to keep their babies." "About time," Rhett commented. "Too many young women with no options." Faith nodded, thinking of the girls she'd encountered over the years. Some they'd helped directly, like Mabel, others they could only point toward whatever limited resources existed. "They want to name it after us, the Ingram House for Women and Children." Rhett looked genuinely surprised. "That's quite an honor." "They're also asking for donations to establish it properly," Faith added. "Land, construction costs, furnishings." "How much do they need?" Faith named a figure that would have seemed astronomical a decade ago. Rhett considered it for only a moment before nodding. "We can manage that. It's a worthy cause." "There's more," Faith continued. "They've asked me to serve as the house mother to oversee the operation." Rhett turned to study her face. "And what do you think about that?" Faith had spent days considering the proposal since the letter arrived. "I think I'd like to try. Not full-time, our children need me here, but perhaps 3 days a week. I could help these women the way you helped me. Show them there's a future beyond their current circumstances." Rhett took her hand, his thumb tracing the wedding band he'd placed there a decade ago. "I think you'd be perfect for it. Your compassion, your experience, who better to guide them?" Faith leaned up to kiss him softly. "Thank you for understanding." "I understand because I know your heart," Rhett replied. "It's too big to keep all that love contained just to our family. You need to share it." From the yard came the sound of children's laughter, and Faith smiled as she watched James push Rebecca on the swing Rhett had hung from the old oak tree. Sarah was showing Mabel's Daniel how to lasso the wooden practice post, while the twins appeared to be constructing an elaborate fort from discarded lumber. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked Rhett, gesturing toward their brood. "That day when you found me." Rhett's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I hoped," he admitted. "Even then, seeing you standing there so brave despite everything, I had a feeling you were going to change my life." Faith thought back to that frightened young woman, alone and desperate. "I was certain my life was over, that I'd lost any chance at happiness when Edward rejected me and my parents sent me away. And now," Faith turned to meet his gaze, still as loving as the day he'd proposed, "now I know it was just beginning, the real life I was meant to have, with the man I was meant to love." In the distance, church bells rang out from Nogales, calling the faithful to evening service. Faith and Rhett remained on their porch, surrounded by the family they had built together, secure in the knowledge that God's love indeed lived here in the home and hearts they shared, in the community they had helped create, and in the legacy of compassion they would leave behind. The pregnant woman turned away from a church had found not just shelter but her true purpose, thanks to a cowboy who recognized that sometimes faith requires action, not just words. Their love story, begun in desperation, had blossomed into something neither could have imagined, a testament to the power of second chances and the unexpected ways that love can heal even the deepest wounds. As twilight settled over Silver Creek Ranch, Faith rested her head on Rhett's shoulder, perfectly content. Their journey had not always been easy, but every step had led them here, to this moment of complete belonging. And for that, she would be forever grateful.